So far, we've looked at judging whether your decision or action is ethical based upon the consequences of that action. Okay, now we got to shift gear to an entirely different way of thinking about it. We focus on what you're doing, on your duties that may restrict your action. We'll do that in 2 little videos. So one of the key criticisms of a consequentialist approach is you don't care about how you achieve the outcome, that you don't look at your intent or what you meant to do. What really matters is what happens, not what you intended. A deontologist would argue intent is critical. Did you intend to do the right thing or not is a key consideration that is ignored with these consequentialists' approach. And the word deontology springs from this idea that we have a duty, that we have a way that we should act, our intent, this duty to act in a morally right way, and it's matched duty with science. So the science of understanding the duty of doing the right thing. The idea here is that we can work out what the right thing to do is, irrespective of the consequences. What is our duty? What should we intend to do, and how do we work out what we should do? Just as we had a phrase, the ends justifies the means, for teleological or consequentialist approach, we have the phrase, let justice be done, though the world perish, to help us think about deontological approaches. That phrase is trying to capture the idea that what matters is what you're doing and how you're doing it, not the consequences or not the end result of what you're doing. And so we're going to look at 2 theories. In this video, we're going to look at Kant's approach. So let's get into it. Now, I'm kind of only going to say this once, but I think Kant was German, and so the real name you pronounce it, way you pronounce his name is Kant, but I can't keep saying that, so I'm going to keep saying Kant, knowing that it's wrong. But Kant had this idea from the 18th century. To really understand it, and I think history helps. We've got the Enlightenment and growing secularity in Europe. So prior to the Enlightenment, how did you work out what was ethical or moral to do? Generally, church. Religion told you. And in fact, because most people couldn't read and there was no printing press, you were told what was the right thing. And not only that, because there wasn't much travel, the local priest told you what was ethical. And Kant's kind of going, I don't know if this is the right thing. We got the Enlightenment. Maybe we can think for ourselves and maybe we can work it out. So that's what he's struggling with. How can you work out what the right thing to do is without relying on someone who may or may not have good insight into what the morally right thing to do is? So Kant's idea is that your actions or decisions are only ethical, they only have moral worth, when they're motivated by goodwill. That is, when you're trying to do the right thing, right? You have to intend it. You're acting out of a sense of moral duty. So you don't care about the consequences. You can only act morally if you're acting because it's the right thing to do. Now, if it's morally the right thing to do, he's making the argument, then you have a moral duty to do that thing, even if they continually result in bad consequences. You should act that way because that is your moral duty. Now, I really want to stress the idea of intent here, because what it means is that you could have 2 people doing or deciding the same thing, but they're not necessarily equally ethical. If the first person is doing it because they see it as the right thing, they see it as their duty, they have to do that, then they're acting ethically. But if the second person does it with no intent, perhaps it's just habit, then Kant would say that person is not acting ethically. They have no intent. So intent is super important to Kant. And actually, it's a common theme through a lot of moral philosophers is this idea that humans have logic and intellect. That's what separates us, this ability to consciously think through problems, and that we need to use that, and therefore intent becomes central to working out what is ethical. So because we're rational thinking beings, Kant suggests that moral rules can be derived rationally. He's basically saying we can work out for ourselves what is ethical. We don't need to refer to a higher authority, like received wisdom or elders or religion or any other source. We're not just going to parrot what someone tells us. We also don't need to worry about results. We should be able to work it out logically, because if the source of our ethics comes from outside us, it's now no longer our intent. You're not acting out of goodwill. You're acting because someone told you to act that way, or you're acting that way because you want this external reward. This extrinsic motivation is guiding your decision making. And he's saying, no, you should be able to work out what the right thing to do actually is. So, in summary, Kant is saying we have a moral duty to act in a way that we can work out from first principles. So, these moral rules, these things that we can work out, are an imperative. We have to do them. They're a command, right? It's imperative that we act ethically. And it's a categorical imperative. You must categorically act in that way, all of us. So he has this term, categorical imperative. So things that are your duties are categorical imperatives. They're things that you must do all the time. They're your duties. So how did he state this categorical imperative? Kant says we should act only according to the maxim or the rule, only follow rules by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So you should only follow a rule that can be applied by everyone all the time. That's what he's really saying. That's the categorical imperative. The things that are ethical are those that everyone should do all the time. Note, no context. Not saying it's okay to lie sometimes. No, right? Everyone should be able to lie all the time if lying is okay. Okay? Big issue. This really means your will, or what you want to have happen, needs to be consistent. It must make sense in situations all the time. If it doesn't, it won't make sense to a rational being. Yeah, so there's not kind of a lot of content to Kant, but it can be a bit hard to wrap your head around. So he's got this idea of universality, which is this broad overarching idea. He then goes on to break it down to a number of different tests. So essentially we have this standard, the categorical imperative. Well, how do you know if an action will meet the categorical imperative? And so what he does is formulate or write how you could do the tests in different ways. We're going to deal with two of these so you get two different perspectives. So the first formulation of the categorical imperative, or the first way you could try and test whether something is ethical or not, is the statement here. You should act only according to a rule whereby you can at the same time will or believe that it should become a universal law. So you should only follow rules that would universally apply. A second way to express that, he says, is, look, you should treat everyone, whether you or someone else, as an ends and not a means to an ends. You shouldn't use people. If what you're doing or deciding is only so that you can achieve something else, if you're going to lie and deceive someone so that you can achieve an end, you're using them, right? So you shouldn't do that. Now, what he's saying is these formulations are different expressions of the same categorical imperative. And that's because not every rule fits the same question as easily. But if it can pass all of these rules, right, then you know it meets the categorical imperative. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. So the first formulation or the first test he's going to apply is whether the action is universal. Right? So imagine I have a contract with you and I found out, to sell my computer for $500, right? And I find someone who'll buy it for $800. So I want to get that extra $300. Right? So I want to breach my contract with you. So I want to breach a contract. See, this is my act, according to Kant. Then what I need to do is I need to turn the act into a generalized or universal rule, what Kant calls a maxim. So rather than I want to breach my contract for a computer with you, that's the act, we turn it into a universalized rule. Everyone can breach any contract when it doesn't suit them. Notice I'm not talking about the legality or the consequences or this. I'm talking about the ethics of breaching a contract. Is it ethical to breach a contract? Not legal, not what's going to flow damages, etc. if you have bound contract, etc. Is it ethical? Different quality of question. So I want to breach a contract with you because I'm going to make more money. Okay, well, if I had a rule that everyone can breach any contract when it doesn't suit them, then that general rule would allow me to carry out this act. It would allow me to breach my contract with you. So now I have a generalized or universal rule. I have a maxim. So that's what's super important. You look at the act and you turn it into a maxim. Now, once you have this maxim or general rule, you need to work out, is it inconsistent or contradictory? For instance, the whole idea behind a contract, that word means it's enforceable, that you're not going to break it. So if you can breach it or break it when it doesn't suit you, then really it undermines the concept of what a contract is. The whole idea of having a contract is that you know the person is going to follow through on it. But if you're morally allowed not to follow through on it whenever you like, then it's not really a contract. This rule contradicts the concepts in the rule. It means if this rule is morally applicable, if you can breach a contract, then the idea of a contract changes. It's a contradiction in the conception of a contract. So that's the first way you can test whether a rule has universal applicability. Is it illogical? Is it a contradiction in conception? The second one kind of relaxes whether it's strictly illogical. And it says you also need to ask yourself, would you want to live in a world with this rule? Would you want to live in a world where anyone could breach a contract with you whenever it suited them for whatever reason? And most people would say, no, I want a world where we have contracts. So because of that, it's a contradiction in will. So it fails that test. Now, it only needs to fail one, but here it's failing both. So because it fails these tests, it does not meet the first formulation. And so breaching my contract for a computer with you would be considered unethical. And I'm just looking at the act. I'm not looking at the consequences or utility that flow from it. So we have universality. The second test that Kant applies is that of respect. So what he's really saying is you've got to treat people with the dignity that they deserve and not just use them to get what you want. You've got to treat them as an end in themselves, not simply a means to your ends. So I think this idea is deep-rooted in a lot of different traditions, that people have this inherent worth, and so therefore we shouldn't be using them. We should be respecting them and treating them with dignity, allowing them to make decisions and pursue what they would like to pursue. That doesn't mean you can't interact with people to get what you want. What it means is you've got to respect their autonomy in the process, right? So imagine you go to a restaurant. Yes, when you deal with the waiting staff, you're getting what you want. You're getting your order taken, you're getting your meal delivered, you're getting hospitality, right? Yes, you're getting what you want out of it, but you really should be treating them in a way that respects their autonomy. They should freely engage in these activities. So hopefully most of them do, right? They decide, yes, I want this job because I want to do that, so I'm happy to serve you. I'm happy to engage in whatever activity that we might have in place. So we need to think about that. It's not about whether or not you're getting something out of the transaction. It's how you treat people during that transaction. It's about not using people. And that, of course, would include things like not tricking people, not forcing people, not coercing people, not unduly influencing people. All those things are not treating with the person with respect. You're actually trying to get what you want, not allowing them the autonomy and the dignity that they deserve to decide what they want to do as part of this interaction with you. And I think, as I mentioned before, you could see this idea reflected through so many traditions that it appears to be somewhat universal through human society. Okay, so what do you got to do if you practically want to undertake a kind of deontological Kantian analysis? First thing, and this can be a bit harder than what it sounds, so I'd suggest you really have a think about this. You really got to isolate the morally questionable act that you wish to take. What's morally questionable about what you want to do? So, for instance, if you don't want to come to lectures and go to the beach instead, and so you decide to send me an email saying your mother's sick, and so you can't attend lectures. Well, you don't have to do that, but imagine that you did. What's morally questionable? Well, what you want to do is go to the beach, but it's not morally questionable about whether you want to go to the beach. What's morally questionable is you're lying in the email to me. That's what I mean about it can be a bit more difficult to isolate this when you're faced with a real decision. So, first thing you have to do is identify the morally questionable act. Then you generalize that act into a rule. So you want to lie in the email to go to the beach. What is a rule that would allow you to do that? It's morally okay to lie. If that's a moral rule, you can do this. This act is a subset of this rule. Then we take this rule and we say, is it a contradiction in conception? Is it a contradiction in will? So for instance, with contradiction in will, would you want to live in a world where anyone could lie for any reason whatsoever whenever they wanted? Well, most people would say no. You wouldn't want it to be morally okay to do that. So it fails. Yeah? Is this rule treating me with respect? No, you're lying to me to get what you want. So it doesn't need to break all of these rules. It just needs to break one, but we can see here that it breaks multiple rules. So therefore, you sending this email is unethical under Kant. Notice you could get a very different answer. Imagine on a scale of 1 to 10, you got +9 utility from lying and going to the beach. And imagine for me, well, I don't care whether you come or not to the lecture in reality. Well, maybe I'm a little bit sad, so it's -1 if you lie. And maybe if you came to the lecture, you get a little bit of knowledge, and I'm a little bit happy. So not lying in terms of utility is +2. Lying is +8. A utilitarian analysis that we did in the last video would say you morally have to lie to me. Kant is saying the opposite. This is the basis of a lot of the problems that we have in the world about disagreements about what the right thing to do is. We're looking at the problem from entirely different perspectives and standards. So to sum up, Kant asks us to see if the action can be turned into a categorical imperative. A categorical imperative needs to be universal. Formulation 1 helps us work that out. And it needs to be respectful. Formulation 2 helps us work that out. Kant believed these different formulations or ways of asking the question are grounded in the same underlying principle and that essentially they should align. Sometimes his approach can be a little bit difficult to understand, so I really would point you to the readings if you're having a little bit of difficulty following some of the ideas that are in this video. Now, there are some positives with Kant, right? You can work things out. It's pretty clear, etc. It does have that intent element, which is quite appealing. But there's critiques, of course. Let's look at them. So the first thing is this idea that duty is the only thing that's important. Is it really? What about if you act out of feelings rather than duty? Are you really being less moral? Probably something that's clearer to see is that this categorical imperative is very strict. For instance, universalizing lying, as we just saw, would never be acceptable. So Kant would argue that you should never lie. Even, say, if it would save someone's life. Now, look, some philosophers later have argued that Kant really didn't distinguish between accepting a person from the rule and exceptions from the rule itself. The problem is if we allow exceptions to a rule, where do we stop? Doesn't that undermine the whole of Kant's approach, universality? So you run into this problem that should there be exceptions to some of these rules? Because if it's not, it's super, super strict and not terribly practical. A third key problem, and we'll see this come up again with, for instance, the idea of moral rights, is it offers us no way to resolve conflicting duties. For instance, I ought not to lie, and I ought not to let someone be killed. But what if telling the truth leads to someone being killed? Which one takes precedence? Kant gives us no insight into the conflict of duties that can arise. So that's Kant's deontological approach. In the next little video, we're going to extend that to this idea of moral rights, which is a topic that's used in business a lot these days, or it affects business a lot, particularly through things like the SDGs at the moment, etc. And we'll see how that pans out in the next video.